Hello guys and welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week I am once again joined by Gough, the blind filmmaker from Australia of Beernuts Productions. Now if you're a regular listener of the show, you will know that Gough has appeared on Genuine Chit-Chat twice in the past, once on episode 48 and then again in episode 65. Also, he was on last week's episode. Now, I won't delve too deeply into what the subject matter is, I'll just give a couple of bullet points. Essentially, last week we spoke about his new film, How to Treat Women Fairly, which is a comedy mockumentary found on beernutsproductions.com. And this week we're speaking about a documentary he released called I Will Not Go Quietly, which came out around 10 years ago. Now, the documentary, in a sense, put Gough more on the map. He had done comedy before, and he'd sort of travelled the world as a stand-up comedian and had a lot of his finger in a lot of other pies and things, trying to get sort of scripts made and whatnot. The documentary basically goes into the details of how difficult it is for a blind individual to not only get a job in general, but to also make it in comedy and any media industry, really. So in this chat in particular, we basically speak about the aftermath of the documentary, how he kind of made it, some of the issues with it and things like that. And he did create the whole documentary himself. He recorded it, he edited it, he wrote it, he did everything. And he is obviously blind. So it's a feat in itself to create a documentary. But when someone has a disability, which is visual impairment, that just adds another layer to it. As well as those things, we do also speak about travelling, because Gough believes that travelling is very important, and even when he was younger, when he was blind, he actually travelled around the world. So it's a very interesting conversation that we have about travelling, comedy, and obviously his blindness is a big part in the conversation. And as I said last week, we spoke more specifically about his mockumentary, and this one is more of a retrospective into things he has already released. That's about all I'm going to go into, otherwise I'll be rambling on here at the start. There will be a promo for my friend Frank Burton. He has a new book out, which is also an audiobook called Everything I Am, and I played it last week. The reason I'm playing it again this week is because next week I'm due to release part 1 of our chat about that very thing. Frank has a podcast called the Rag Bag Podcast. He's been on the podcast before as well, but I'll go more into them next week and things. So that's the promo. Straight after that there'll be mine and Gough's chat, and then I'll be back right at the end of the chat just to give a little bit more information of other things I'm releasing, like my Star Wars podcast and a few other bits and pieces here. So really hope you guys enjoy the chat. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to all of you at the end.
Hello, Frank. My dad kidnapped me once. A holiday is what this will be. You and me, son. On 12th of October 2004, my dad popped out to buy a bottle of milk and never came back. Frank Burton. That's my name as well. I'm Frank Jr. Of course, your investigation. I know about your secret flat. I have an irrational fear of traffic wardens. Stop sticking your nose into matters that don't concern you. I was Frank Burton's wife and Frank Burton's mother. That was everything I am. Maybe it's like kosher or halal. Kosher or halal bacon, that's a new one. Everything I am. You and me, son.
Everything I Am.
Everything I Am is the brand new novel by the author and podcaster Frank Burton, available as a paperback, ebook and audiobook, which is currently available for Name Your Price. Find all the details at frankburton.co.uk.
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. I'm kind of saying it's the 10-year anniversary of you releasing your documentary, I Will Not Go Quietly. I mean, I think it was out in December of 2010, which is... we are in the same year. I'm kind of cheating because it's closer to 9 years than 10 years. But with this, this is actually I watched it the other night, and I hadn't watched it previously. And, you know, speaking of Beernuts Productions, obviously go up there, you can download it and sort of name your price. You've put it up there very generously to allow people to see it for free, or they can pay for it. So I'd recommend that if people are, say, on the fence maybe, I'd say go check out the documentary, see what you've been through and how interesting of a guy you are, and then sort of look at the other comedy films. But I hadn't watched this. Obviously, we've chatted before, as we've mentioned, but I hadn't actually watched this fully until the other day. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. And I mean, if you want to give people some background, I mean, one of the things that is kind of the selling point in a sense is that you're the first blind individual to, I think it was act in, write, edit, produce and direct a feature-length film. And it's 90 minutes long. So it doesn't, when watching it, you can't tell it's made by an individual who doesn't know what they're doing. Obviously, I'm not saying you don't, but at least it would come as a surprise to, I think, for certain people that a blind individual actually created it. So from that, what happened after like releasing that documentary? Obviously, it kind of spring-loaded Beernuts Productions and what it is today. So I don't know if you want to kind of give some sort of a general idea of what it was like making the film and how it's kind of what's happened since, really.
Yeah, well, the film itself sort of came about due to general frustrations. I mean, there was a couple of times where I thought I was given funding for projects and then they found out I couldn't see, so the funding was pulled and all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't a project that I actively was like, I want to do this, because it's not something, I mean, it just wasn't something that was ever on my radar to do. But I was just frustrated with people not understanding me and my disability and what I can do and what I can't do. And so I thought, well, the best way to explain it is to actually show people. So that's why I made the documentary. And yeah, just to be clear, it's probably the only sensible project that is on the Beernuts Productions website. It's not one of my comedy. I mean, there are a few little funny bits and pieces in there, but it's not a comedy film. It's an actual proper documentary, and it is about disability and mental health, which are two reasonably important subjects. So yeah, and look, when I was making it, when I was sitting down to think how I wanted to go about making it, I thought the best way to do it, again, it wasn't ideal in regards to, it's not what I wanted to do, but I figured it was the best way to do it, was to use my own story as a template and then get experts to speak about those subjects. So, you know, I might talk about education, and then we've got like a school teacher and a guy who's done a PhD in disability education to also just put their points of view. So I talk about my experience, and then we have experts giving their viewpoints on these matters as well. So that's how I thought the best way to go about making the actual documentary would be.
Yeah, and so since releasing that, did you? I seem to recall when we were first chatting. After releasing that documentary, was that quite a fairly big hit in Australia? Did you go on some chat shows and things like that after it was released?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was a fairly big hit. I think that would be a slight exaggeration. But well, that was the other problem. I mean, I sent it to networks and whatnot to get it commercially released, and some of the reasons I got were quite flabbergasting. I mean, some of the things that were said to me were quite amazing, that they even after watching it, they still didn't understand the point that I was trying to make. And it was quite obvious in the things that they were saying that they didn't get it. And so that's why, again, I thought, well, how am I going to get people to, I mean, it did get played in a cinema in Brisbane, which was really cool. And also, obviously, yes, like you said, I got some really good press with it as well, which was fantastic, and got on some shows and whatnot, which was great. But I wanted everybody to watch it. And so that's when the idea of having direct downloads through the website came about, because I thought, well, how can I get people to watch this film? And the idea came, well, why not if I put it on the Beernuts Productions website, which to that point was just more of a run-of-the-mill advertising kind of website for my production company. It wasn't what it is today. You know, I thought to myself, well, if I put it up there, then anybody can watch it. So that's where the idea came of having direct downloads. And then obviously now, as you know, there's 18 films up there for people to download, plus the audio pieces and a couple of books. So, you know, that's where that idea sort of came from as well, to have direct downloads on the website, was the documentary and wanting as many people as possible to watch it. So, yeah.
When watching the documentary, obviously it was you essentially 10 or so years ago, and in it was, there are levels of optimism within it, but obviously there are some very, very dark moments within that and things. And did you find that, were you, to rip off the Band-Aid in this, rather me pitter-pattering around it, you speak about your suicide attempts in the documentary, and obviously you're very open about it, and it's a very respectful thing to do, is to open yourself up so in such a raw manner. Did you find that after releasing I'll Not Go Quietly, it kind of gave you that passion? Because you were saying that, you tried doing stand-up comedy and everything seemed to be going really, really well, and then there's the issues with the work visa and etc., and then that didn't go through. And then you had scripts written and stuff, and they kept getting all the green lights, and then that didn't go through. Did you find that We Will Not Go Quietly was the thing that kind of was a turning point in some degree? It kind of revitalized your passions in a sense?
Well, yes and no. So I guess eventually it did, but not at the start. So it got released, like you said, in December of 2010, and I had a really rough time of it through 2011 because I wasn't able to get it released like I would have liked it to have been released, and it wasn't as well received as what I would have liked it to have been well received because, as I said earlier, people didn't sort of understand it, really. They didn't get my point. So I didn't, and then I was like, well, shit, what am I going to do now? And then I sort of came to the realization, well, I've already put one film up on the website. Why don't I just go ahead and make more films and put them up on the website and everybody else can go get fucked, pretty much. So that was sort of, I guess that was kind of the awakening, I guess. So I guess it was kind of like a snowball that just took a while to get pushed down the hill, I suppose, would be the best sort of metaphor to describe it. So, yeah.
And how long did it take you to sort of put all that together? From you thinking, okay, I should do a documentary, day one, how long was it until you actually had the finished product?
About 6 months. So, yeah, it took about 6 months. So I reckon I started, if I think back, I think it was probably about July of 2010. And then I got my equipment, which obviously was, I got my equipment together, then organised the interviews with the people that I wanted to interview. And then editing, it was pretty quick because I'd worked in radio. So I just sort of put it together like it was a radio play, essentially. I just edited it by audio because it's a documentary. So you can do that with a documentary. So it's pretty straightforward. And then, yeah, it was sort of straight to sending it out to different, cinemas and networks and production distributors and all that sort of stuff to see what I could get in regards to a release. So, yeah, I'd say about 6 months it was in production itself.
Okay, that's really cool. And there's an interesting segment within the documentary, which I hadn't really thought about that much, obviously because I don't have a famous parent or anything like that. And it was quite interesting where, a lot of people probably off the cuff would go, if you ask, would you have wanted your parent to be famous? They'd probably, a lot of them would go, yeah, that'd be really cool, actually. It sounds, maybe they'd have a lot of money or we'd be, well known, all that sort of jazz. But you and also your sister do mention that it wasn't actually as fun as it may have potentially sounded. And I wanted to ask about that a little bit, essentially. Have you found that, I already know the answer to the question because I've seen the documentary, but did you find that you were, a lot of people viewing you in your dad's shadow, in a sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I mean, Lisa, my sister, had it as well, like you said, but obviously being the son makes it worse because obviously you've grown up and he probably didn't help the situation in regards to, he kind of exacerbated it in regards to if he was doing a newspaper interview or something of that nature, he'd include me as like a mini-me type of a situation, which, I mean, I was only a child, so I didn't have an understanding. I just thought, this is cool, this is great, but obviously looking back now, it was completely the wrong thing for him to do. And if I had have been, if there had been a good adult in the situation, they would have put a stop to that sort of stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. It was not probably ideal. It would, and of course, then having a disability on top of that makes life even more difficult. So you've got something else to try and cope with and deal with as well. So yeah, it wasn't the easiest of childhoods and upbringings, it has to be said.
No, of course. I mean, the disability alone, as you said, would be a really heavy thing to deal with, and then also as a separate matter, having because your excuse me, your dad, his sort of stage name was Ugly. I think you mentioned within it is Ugly Dave Gray, and obviously having your dad, I think you guys mentioned it, is in school having your dad as someone who's known as ugly, and then you're getting told that you have the resemblance of that. That's quite bad. And I think you had some footage of you went on like a chat show at one point to talk about I think you wanted to talk about some stand-up comedy or some dates or some things that you were kind of doing, and then the interviewer just asked you purely questions about your dad.
Yes. Yeah, that was, I think it's quite funny actually, when you look at that bit of footage, is probably the most awkward interview you could probably ever watch. Because I mean, I only put a small segment of it on the film, but it screams awkward because I don't know if people are aware of this, but when you go on a proper chat show like that, they'll pre-organize the questions with you. So the questions that I'd organized with the producer were all about, I was doing stand-up comedy at the time, and they were all about the gigs that I was doing in Melbourne and all that sort of stuff. And they would, there was a couple of disability questions in there and all that sort of stuff. And then obviously I go on there and none of those questions got asked, and it was all about my father. And it was really awkward viewing. It was awkward when I look back at it. It looks awkward to me. So I could only imagine it would look very awkward to a random person. Would be like, wow, that was uncomfortable. But yeah, but yeah, no, that's just the kind of thing that happened, unfortunately.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the sort of the great things about podcasts these days as well, is that, you know, with this, as I'm sure any listeners of mine will be aware, I don't really edit the podcast. So maybe if there's like a long pause or if I cough or something like that, then I will edit that out just for listener.
Doesn't hear you coughing up a lung.
But well, yeah, exactly. No one wants to hear me coughing up on a microphone really loudly right in their ear when they're hoping for like a nice chat with someone. So, but I've heard from a lot of people that from other podcasts and things that they go, yeah, you go on these chat shows and it's not. But the way they edit it makes it look like a really normal standard conversation, but they say a lot of it is quite weird and almost like clunky, where they've got all these pre-done questions and stuff, but then, you know, they may change it last minute and then you've only got a certain amount of time to answer it, and there's just so many people involved in it. Whereas like when me and you chat, I write a couple of footnotes, and before pressing the record button, I just say, I'm probably going to talk about these couple of things. Is that cool? And that's about it. And the rest of it is just natural conversation. But having all these weird, like, obviously they have to have cameras there to be able to film it, but you've got often an audience there, and then loads of people every time the camera stops running in, adding makeup, doing this. It must be quite a weird thing to be, like, it's almost like a faux conversation, like not a real one almost.
Well, I mean, it's good and bad. It's good in the sense of, everybody has watched, whether it be, you know, Stephen Colbert or Conan O'Brien or those sorts of shows, right? Everyone's seen one of those kinds of shows, or Ellen or whatever it might be, and they'll set the person up and they'll say, I believe you were in a taxi cab in New York City last week. And then the guy will tell a funny anecdote about being, so I mean, that's a good thing in regards to you get a chance to do a funny anecdote and and then you obviously get a chance to plug your movie or your album or whatever the reason is that you're on there for. So, I mean, that's the good part about it. You know, you get to prepare what you want to say so it can be funny or interesting or whatever you want to say, basically how you want to present yourself. You're given the opportunity to present yourself in whatever light you want to present yourself. But the downside is, like you say, it's not a real conversation like what the podcast interviews are. I mean, there's very rarely a podcast interview that goes for under, I mean, those ones on the TV, they're between 4 and 8 minutes because that's all the time they're allowed. So, but with podcasts, I mean, very rarely is a podcast interview any shorter than like 15 or 20 minutes, which means at some stage you're going to have to say something real and unscripted because you can't do a 20-minute scripted interview, you know? So, yeah, so that's I suppose they're the pluses and the minuses of those sorts of things.
Exactly. And one thing that you bring up in your documentary is something which is quite a common theme I found with a lot of the guests I've spoken to, and it's about travel. And you mentioned that, you know, you travelled around sort of North America and stuff a lot, and then you also travelled around the UK and Europe a bit, as well as obviously around Australia and stuff. And you say, I think at some point, that you think that every 21-year-old should be made to go travelling. Obviously, I assume you don't mean a dictator regime and kick everyone out of the country, but, you know, as in it's so helpful to be able to do that. And I wonder if you could just talk about some of your experiences from travelling and what helped you and what you took back from the experiences.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that it makes people grow up, essentially, because you've got no choice but to look after yourself. So, I mean, very basic level, I suppose, you know, you've got to wash your own clothes and make your own bed and make sure you got money so you can eat and pay your rent and make sure you got a bed to sleep in and a roof over your head, and you got nobody who's going to look after you or no one to fall back on if you make a mistake. It's all on you. So you've got no choice but to grow up and be a mature adult. But at the same time, you're still young enough where you don't have any fear, so you can do stupid things like go out and get shit-faced at nighttime and have a great time and party up and have an awesome time. But then in the daytime, you still need to learn how to be responsible. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. But see, I reckon if I was to do that, like if I was to go traveling now, it would be far more of a sensible and subdued experience because, I mean, it's just who you are. I mean, as young people, you don't have you have no fear. I mean, you don't care. The consequences don't matter as much as what they do when you're in your 30s and 40s, So that's another good reason why it's good when you're young. So you get to make a lot of silly mistakes, but you learn from them, which is always a good thing. And like I say, there's you can still party and have a great time, which I absolutely did. There's no question of that. And I had an amazing time. I mean, the people I met and the people I partied with. I mean, there's still some people that I met back then who, I partied with. I still stay in contact and talk to, like today, which is wonderful. I mean, I got friends all over the world because of those trips that I did, which is incredible. It's so cool, So there's so many bonuses to traveling. Plus, I mean, it's an educational thing. I mean, I am a bit of a nerd deep down, so I do like going to seeing, the castles or the museums or whatnot. I like doing that sort of stuff. I find that fun. So during the daytime, you can do a little bit of that. And then at the nighttime, you can go out and party and have a good time as well. And when you're young, you've got the energy to do all that sort of stuff. So, there's nothing bad about it at all. There is no downside as far as I can see. And I was doing stand-up comedy as a job. So my job also allowed me to travel around. So, I mean, with the UK, for example, I was going to tiny little country towns and all sorts of stuff. I mean, places where I would never have gone in a million years if I wasn't being sent there to do a show. And the other good part, obviously, is that my work, obviously, doing stand-up comedy is 1 hour at nighttime. So during the daytime, I still get to do touristy stuff and visit things. And then at nighttime, I do my show and then I can party with people from the audience afterwards. So it really, it was very lucky in that regard that I was able to do a job like stand-up comedy that allowed me to travel and to travel to such rare. I mean, I did when I was in Canada. I hooked up with an agent who sent me on a tour of all the oil rig towns of Alberta and BC and up on the Yukon and through Saskatchewan. So, I mean, these are places where nobody goes. It's just oil rig towns. But, I mean, it was still interesting to go there. It was still fun and still met some amazing people doing it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's just little things like that. Like I went to places that aren't even on a fucking map. You know what I mean? Like it's super cool. I like that I did that. I think it's a wonderful thing. And so, yeah, I absolutely would encourage any of your listeners out there who are tossing up whether or not to throw a backpack on their back and go camping through South America or whatever it might be. Just get amongst it and do it. I mean, you gotta do these things because, I mean, you'll learn so much about yourself, about life, about other people. I mean, it's just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it is as you mentioned, it's one of the best ways to sort of organically grow as a person. As you clearly pointed out, you've got so many different factors that come into it. You have to manage your own money and take care of yourself. And if you don't, no one's there to hold your hand and do it. You do have to, be smart, think about things, go around cities and find your own way. You do meet loads of new people and you get to experience new cultures. And it's all of this is so paramount, I find, to people, to grow. And I think that my girlfriend Megan, she and I have both done a fair amount of traveling. She's done generally more than I have, but she speaks French, Spanish and Italian. So when she travels around Europe, she can speak to so many people, obviously, as well as she speaks English. And so she's done like a whole month with her friend where they just went interrailing. So they just travel around Europe on train and they go to loads of different places. And Megan has said, like, a lot of the time the stop off towns where you're just, we'll just stop here just overnight to get to the next place we want to go. A lot of time when you stop in these little towns that you would never otherwise go to, you have some of the best nights and you meet some of the coolest people. And Megan's got, I think there's 5 or 6 people, and I've met 2 or 3 of them who she's met abroad and things, and now some of our closest friends. She's actually got a friend of hers called Emily who lives in Australia. I can't remember where in Australia, and she's told me many times, but I've met her before. She came over to the UK, and she's got some friends of hers that live in America, and we're meeting them in a couple of weeks' time. We're going up to Scotland. So meeting all these people, I think, is definitely a really important thing for anyone. It's always great to meet new people, but it's, as you say, I think it's undervalued traveling. And I think that obviously you being in Australia, I imagine, and a lot of my listeners as well who are in America, it can be more difficult to some degree. In England, I don't think there's much of an excuse, because you can get the ferry or even the train or a plane over to France for under £100. So, and once you're over there, it's not that expensive. So when you want to travel around Europe's all right next to each other. But obviously Australia's so far away from a lot of the other things, and America is absolutely huge. I know America, sort of North America, is similar size to Australia, but with the whole of America, you've got, North America, and including Canada and stuff, and then you've also got sort of Central America, and then the more southern Latin countries. You've got space to travel, but I feel like going across the world and going to really, really different countries it's so important. And I think you said that, was it Canada or America? Was that one of your favourite places that you found on your travels?
Yeah, well, I had a great time in America. I think Americans get a really bum rap. I think 1 or 2 bad apples spoil it for everybody else. Because when I was in America, I found the people to be so generous and so giving and so warm and so hospitable. They were just fantastic. I mean, there were many different stories I could have told in the documentary, and to you now. I mean, there are so many stories of just me ending up in a place and finding some random people and then staying at their house. I mean, who does that? But they're just really nice, genuine, kind human beings, and they love a laugh and they love a good time, and they're friendly, and they eat really cool food because it's unhealthy, and that's great. I mean, like, it's amazing. I found America to be a wonderful place, and I think that, like I said, the America as a country often gets bad publicity unfairly just because of a couple of idiot people, unfortunately. But yeah, look, I enjoyed everywhere I went. Honestly, there was maybe, I think there was one time I can specifically think of where I didn't feel safe, and that was when I was in the UK. I got booked to do this show that was about maybe 15, 20 minutes out of Manchester up north. And it was in a really, really rough part of town. And I remember walking back to the train station after the gig on Saturday night, and I could just feel eyes on me, and I couldn't see anybody. And I don't think it's because of my disability I couldn't see them. I think they were just well hidden, But I just thought to myself, I need to get to this train station. I need to get there right now, because I don't feel safe at all. I need to get out of here because this could kick off. I just didn't feel comfortable at all. And that's one time I felt like that in 3 years of traveling, because it was 2003, 2004, and 2005 was when I was traveling. And I'm meaning, like, I've been drunk as a skunk in the middle of New York City, in the middle of London at 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I've put myself in some pretty precarious situations. I mean, in Europe and whatnot, just partying and whatnot and having a good time. So, I mean, but at no stage have I ever felt, just that one single time was where I felt a little bit unsafe and I needed to extricate myself from that situation. At no other time did I feel unsafe or uncomfortable. And I think, again, that goes on to a point we made previous, which was if you just use a bit of common sense, then everything will be okay. And, I mean, at the end of the day, I'd like to think I have a reasonable amount of common sense. And so as much as, like I say, I put myself in some probably silly situations, there was never a time where the situation was of a dangerous or of a nature that could have been considered to be unsafe. It was just silly as in, I've drunk too much at a pub and it's now 4 a.m. and I've got to find out how I'm going to get back to my backpacker hostel or whatever. You know what I mean? So, but at no stage did I do anything like outrageously dumb, because I would like to think I have a reasonable amount of common sense, which kind of kicks in if a situation starts looking a bit 50-50. I got enough common sense to get myself out of that. And I think also that goes to a lot of in the documentary, which we were chatting about earlier. In the doco, I talk about some of the training that Guide Dogs Australia did with me, and also one or two of the school teachers that I had in my younger years at school. And I think a lot of the life lessons that they taught me as a youngster helped me a lot with my traveling as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things as well where anyone listening who sort of hasn't gone travelling, it's like if an Australian blind gentleman can go travelling in Europe and America, then there's really no excuse for you to be able to do it. You know, it's one of those things where if especially when you're by yourself as well, and you were a bit younger at the time, sort of more close to my age, and I can't remember who said it, but it was almost like, I think someone said it was like traveling is almost like exercise for the soul or something like that, some cheesy line. And it's like, well, it's true.
Yeah, well, I have to agree with it. I mean, it really is. So when I was in Canada, one of the guys who I'm actually good friends with, actually, I'll send you his details because see if he's interested in coming on your podcast, because he would definitely be a very interesting guest. I met him at a backpackers in Vancouver. Him himself, he's from... I believe he's from Toronto. Yeah, he's from Toronto. And so he was, and he loved traveling. He was an accountant and quit his job and just started traveling. And so he was contemplating whether or not he should travel through South America and write a book because he loved writing. And I said, well, of course you should travel through South America and write a book. That sounds like a very good thing to do. Do it, and do it now. And sure enough, he did. And he wrote a book, and he sent me a copy of the book, which was really lovely. And it's a cool thing. And he's got now a YouTube channel called Borders on Budgets. And he's very nerdy, but he's like the nicest guy ever. He's like, he's just a super dude. And I find him quite funny. I think he's one of those guys who doesn't realize that he's funny. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, we've all got friends like that, you know. He just comes out with stuff that really tickles me, and I don't think he doesn't mean to be funny. He just is. But he's a super guy, and he's very interesting. And yeah, he's traveled the world 2 or 3 times over now, and like I say, he's got a YouTube channel going and everything now. And he's turned his passion of traveling into a job, which is just super cool. I think that's just amazing. So I got nothing but respect for him. I think he's awesome, is Matt. So yeah, very interesting guy. And so, I mean, it's called Borders on Budgets because he's got no money, but he still figures out a way to go all over the world. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'd definitely be interested in having him on the show. If you get in contact, that'd be really cool. Because, yeah, I have, in fact, the second episode of Genuine Chit-Chat I ever did was with a friend of mine called TJ, and she had recently got back from traveling and things, and that's all we spoke about for about 2 hours, where she traveled around Asia and all these other things and spoke about her experiences. And I've had other people on as well who have generally spoken about their traveling experience and stuff, and I think it's something where it seems very daunting, and it seems like it would be really, really expensive, and obviously it can be very expensive, but if you're smart and you, as you say, use common sense and you look into things a little bit more, then you can do it on a budget. So speaking with this guy, that sounds absolutely awesome, and I'd absolutely love to. So yeah, hit him up whenever you can, and I'm sure we'll get something sorted. And I'll be sure to play a little Beernuts production promo as well in the episode as well. So added promo for you guys. I think we're coming towards the end now, and you've been very generous with your time. And I think in Australia, is it like 11 p.m. right now?
No, because of daylight saving. So that's why I always have to, when I'm doing a podcast interview with the States or with the UK, because of daylight savings, whether it be on my end or on their end, I always have to triple check with Suri, because in my brain, I sort of know roughly what the times are going to be, but I always just check with Suri to make sure that I got the times right. So no, because of daylight saving, it's just after 9 p.m. So I'm all cool. So yeah, that's all good here.
Not quite as late for you as anticipated. That's really cool. But I want to ask as well. I think I might have touched upon this when we first spoken. But do you have any interest or any thought of making another documentary in the future or anything like that, or is that just kind of not for now, but not necessarily closing the door?
Well, there's been a few people actually, because as you mentioned earlier, the last one was done 10 years ago. I've had a few people say to me that they'd like a follow-up as in what's happened in the last 10 years. So, I will not go quietly too, and then just the last 10 years since the last documentary, which isn't a bad idea. I mean, would you be keen to see something like that?
I was thinking when I was watching it, I would have loved to have seen, because it ends on, I'd say it doesn't end on a high note, to be blunt. It's a really great documentary, but it is one of those things where you're just open and honest with it. And it would, I think, be quite nice to see how you've gone on, because it's almost like in a film where the character says, their last line is something like, it kind of throws the thing on its head a little bit, and you're, oh, do I know what's going to happen with this character? And it was almost like that with the end of your documentary. And obviously, I know because I was planning on talking to you, so I know that you're finding things. But I think if you did say that and you did sort of do a follow-up, I think it would be really, really good. I'd love to watch it. And obviously, you could come on the show and promote it again. But I think it would also, in almost in a business sense, I think if you did that and you could do it on like a very, very low budget again, it could probably help Beernuts quite a lot once again. So I think in that regard, I would definitely love to see it, and I think it would be cool for you guys to make another one. But I think it'd have to be done right in a sense. Like all the other things you've released have been great, and so I don't really I don't worry about your ability to do so. But doing a follow up to a documentary that is personal, I think you would have to be not quite careful, but it'd be quite easy to make an hour and a half thing where you just vaguely talk about your life and what's happened without any real punch or meaning. But I think if you sat down and did it properly, which I assure you would, it would be something I think would be really, really, really cool to see. And I think it would be really helpful for those who are suffering with mental illness and things, if they saw what it was like sort of 10 years ago, essentially, and then saw what you're like now, and what sort of changed and what helped you in some of the journeys and things that you've done. I think that would be really, really helpful for people. So yeah, I personally would definitely be interested in that.
All right. Well, I've had a few people with a similar viewpoint to yourself, and it is something that is in the back of my mind because of it being 10 years old. Maybe towards the end of the year, I might sort of think a bit more carefully about doing a follow-up. But, because it is something, I kind of agree, it is something that I would like to do. It's just a matter of kind of like you touched on then, I am very, how can I word it? I need to be very careful, just like you said, I need to be very careful that I can still maintain an entertaining 90 minutes. So that therein lies the challenge. See, with the last film, how old was I? So I was 29. So I had 29 years of experience. So whereas this time I've only got a third of that. I've only got 10 years of experience. So you got to stretch 10 years out into 90 minutes instead of 29 years into 90 minutes, But, I mean, I'm quite certain it can be done. It just needs to be done, as you said, it needs to be done with a lot of thought and made sure that I get a different group of experts in talking about a range of subjects again that are appropriate and putting it together and making it all work. So, yeah, it's one of those things where it might be a bit tricky, but it could also be a very interesting and a good challenge, and it might make my brain work a little bit harder than it has done for a while. So that's not always a bad thing either. So yeah.
Yeah, and also if you did it, another option could be things like, this makes it sound like I'm trying to plug myself. I'm really not. But like obviously a lot of the people you've met from doing Beernuts, the various, I know you've met loads and loads of different podcasters and things, and obviously a lot of the actors that have been recurring in some of your films, and obviously Simon as well, being a producer and all these sort of other things. There'd be quite a few other people that would be quite interesting to talk to. And if you had some of the people who were in the first documentary as well, they could be like, oh yeah, since Gough made the documentary, yeah, he had afterwards, he was still a bit down, and you could go into how it was hard to get released and put out in places, but then silver lining is that at seemingly at present things have all kind of worked out. But yeah, I mean, I'd be 100% game for you making that, and if you ever did want to make it again and you want any assistance of any kind, or even just say, hey, would this be good in the documentary, send me an email or whatever, or even we could chat on Skype or this or whatever, and I'd be happy to spitball ideas or listen to your ideas if you sort of went down that road. But I think it's definitely worth considering. So yeah.
No, no. Well, I am. It is something that's been in the back of my mind for about a year or so, because there's been a few people that have suggested that it would be a good idea to do a follow up. So I suppose for folks out there listening, the best thing to do is to stay tuned to all the Beernuts social media channels to see what I'm getting up to, because that is obviously the best way to stay up to date. Obviously, so yeah, but. You'll be able to tell if I go down that route, if I do. But yeah, it is something that I am seriously considering doing. It's just a matter of figuring out the best way to go about it. And it's kind of like you said earlier, which is a very true thing, which is you can overthink something, and sometimes you do need to walk away for, whether it be a month, a day, a year, and leave it alone. And then when you come back to it, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on above your head because you've had time to rest your brain about it. So it might be one of those things too, where I might just need to have a bit of a think about it and then put it to one side for 5 minutes and then come back and see if the light bulb goes off and there's a couple of little ideas that I could make it work with. So yeah, no, but it is something that's definitely in my thought process for sure.
100%. And well, that pretty much brings us to the sort of end of our chat, and it's been delightful again. And a good thing is that what you can do is say, go to Beernuts Productions and download the Docco. I love it when I hear you say Docco. People don't say Docco in England. I don't think I've ever heard people say it in America. So I love certain little Australian sort of linguistic mannerisms. And
yeah, we're very lazy. We like to shorten everything. If you were to, Mike is already shortened from Michael, but I'm sure we could find some other way to. We'll just call you M or something like that. That's just in Australia. That's just what we do. We're lazy. Like afternoon is arvo. We're a lazy group of people that just shorten everything down.
That's incredible. And if people want to check out the Docco, what they should do is, because I said earlier on, they can basically download it and they can choose to donate or anything like that. If people are listening, what you should all do is go watch the documentary. Then if you think it's amazing, donate to Beernuts Production, and then that will help Gough see that he needs to make another one. And then everyone wins.
Absolutely. There are donation buttons on the website. And obviously, just so people do know, any money that is donated, it goes straight into the production account to make the next film. So it all helps with making more production. So it's one of those situations where everybody wins, because I get to make more films and employ more local actors and crew members and things like that. And obviously I produce more work, which hopefully will entertain more people. And so it's one of those things where, it's the circle of life, Hakuna Matata, it's one of those good things. So if people can obviously spare $1 or $2, then there are some donation buttons. But of course, there's also all the projects that they can download as well. So they can get something for their money as well by downloading the films and getting a laugh and having some entertainment.
Perfect. Well, Gough, you've been very generous with your time, and it is always an absolute pleasure to chat with you. And yeah, as always, when you release your next film and things, and if you do end up going forward with the documentary and stuff, hit me up. We'll have another chat about it, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will love it, as they always do. So thank you so much. I'll make sure I include links to everything, Beernuts Productions and the social media and all that sort of jazz in the show notes. And this is a nice long chat, so I'll be splitting it in two, so you have 2 weeks of promo from me. So that will be great. Is there anything you just want to add just before we close out?
Oh, no, just the usual, beernutsproductions.com. That's the besides the genuine Chit-Chat website, of course. That's the only other website people need to know is the beernutsproductions.com. Just go there and download, and hopefully I can give you some entertainment, because that's what it's all about. So yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much once again, Gough.
No, thank you, Mike. I really do appreciate your time.
And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. As I have said, Gough appeared in numerous episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat in the past. Obviously, he appeared in the one last week, which I imagine you guys know about by now. And also, he did appear in episode 48 and episode 65 of Genuine Chit-Chat. I would probably recommend going and listening to episode 48, because that's the first time me and Gough actually were chatting on air. So, it's good. It's a fun chat. And obviously check out Beernuts Productions as well, because obviously I see all the films that I speak about with him when I have these podcasts with him, and some of them are absolutely amazing. So really recommend you guys check him out and give Gough all the love in the world. Not to mention that obviously the I Will Not Go Quietly documentary is completely free on Beernuts Productions, and you can donate to that. So I would recommend people check that out, because it's a really, really interesting documentary. Anyway, coming up, as I said in the intro, next week should be part 1 of my chat with Frank Burton. That's going to be another 2-parter. He has another book out called Everything I Am. He has appeared in previous episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat, including episode 34, which is more specifically about his podcast Ragbag and epilepsy itself, because Frank Burton does have epilepsy. And the second episode was about his book of short stories called The 100. It's an anthology book of loads of little short stories that eventually sort of intertwine in things. And the thing I love the most about that book is that the world it's in is really, really cool. There's a lot of cool, interesting ideas within those stories. And also, as well as Everything I Am and The 100, the audio versions of them are found on Bandcamp as a Name Your Price. So I really recommend you paying a bit of money to it, because he puts so much work and effort into them if you do go check those out. But as I say, The 100 and Everything I Am are amazing. And for clarity, when we speak about the 100 book, it is an episode 56 of Genuine Chit Chat. That is a 2-parter as well. And after that, I haven't actually got any episodes recorded. I think myself and Megan are going to do a podcast soon because, obviously we're in isolation, so that's fun. Talking about what we've been up to, sort of what couples can, I guess, do in isolation and things. And also Animal Crossing, because Megan's only just discovered it. I played it many years ago, and I kind of showed her New Horizons. We bought it on the Switch, and she's addicted to it, so she wants to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that, have our usual sort of fun there. I believe I'm going to have Tony Farina on the podcast again, and I may speak to Janine Mercer about having her on the podcast again. I'm trying to kind of get more returning guests, because the way it is at the moment, the podcast numbers aren't as much, which isn't really a big deal to me, but I imagine that the majority of people listening to these podcasts are ones who are already subscribed. There's not going to be that many new people. So as well as trying to get guests during this whole COVID thing and trying to get new people on the show and all that sort of other jazz, it's just easier and more enjoyable for myself if I try and speak to more returning guests and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm going to aim to do a little bit, but we'll see. We'll see how things sort of turn out. And if any of you guys are Star Wars fans and haven't paid attention to the very last outros of the last few episodes, which I think I've spoken about it, I have a show called Star Wars Comics in Canon, where every Saturday an episode comes out, and they're all less than half an hour at present, where I basically speak about Star Wars comics, specifically ones that are canon. I've had 3 episodes out now. Well, technically it's 4, but I called the first episode 0, because I just want to kind of explain to people what I was going to be doing on the show, as well as what canon and legends actually means, the timeline that we use to kind of measure things in Star Wars, which is before or after the Battle of Yavin. Those sort of things were in episode 0, as I called it. Then episode 1 was about the rise of Kylo Ren, how he got his lightsaber colour, how he got into the Knights of Ren, what happened directly after him and Luke had the confrontation in Last Jedi. There's another one, which was episode 2, I did about Darth Maul, because a lot of people don't know that Darth Maul had a huge amount of content done about him beyond The Phantom Menace. He's actually a very interesting and complex character, so I speak about some of the comics he's been in there. And then the episode that would have released yesterday is how C-3PO got his red arm. That episode is only about 15 minutes long. It's not even that, actually. I think it's like 14 minutes long. And I just explain, it's a one-shot comic called C-3PO Phantom Limb. It just explains how he got his red arm that you see in The Force Awakens, because the only content that actually tells you how he got that is the Lego Star Wars video game, as in Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens, and if you get the Phantom Limb DLC, or this one comic, which is kind of hard to find in a sense. So if you're interested in Star Wars, you like comics, or if you're more so is if you are interested in Star Wars and aren't really fussed on the comics but want to hear more information, some of the key points that come from the comics, make sure you check out Star Wars Comics in Canon. For full clarity, that is found on the Comics in Motion podcast feed. They are friends of the show. I've been on their show before, they've been on mine. But yeah, Star Wars Comics in Canon on the feed of Comics in Motion. You should be able to find it basically anywhere that you listen to this show except on YouTube. So it'll be on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, Acast, all that sort of jazz. Anyway, that's enough waffle and self-promotion on my own show for me. So I just want to say I appreciate each and every one of you guys sort of listening to this. I hope it's getting any of you through what are obviously weird and uneasy times. My podcasts aren't necessarily going to be central around the coronavirus and things, but obviously it's going to be brought up in subjects that I speak about. If you want to hear more from me as well, I was on a recent episode of the Ask Win podcast, and I was also in a recent episode of Friends in Your Ears. So if you can't get enough of my voice, you listen to the Star Wars podcast and you listen to Genuine Chit Chat, then go check out Ask Win and go check out Friends in Your Ears. Friends in Your Ears is a great podcast as well, because I was on with someone else called Amanda, as well as the host Kathleen, and we all just talk about podcasts that we like, what got us into podcasting, some of our favourite ones, that sort of jazz. So a lot to listen to. Anyway, guys, I hope you are all staying safe in this crazy coronavirus stuff that's all going on. I hope a lot of your jobs are okay. I hope your families are okay. I'm sending my love to all of you. If any of you want to chat or anything like that, you can either email me at genuinechitchat@outlook.com. You can find me on all the social media channels, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Genuine Chit Chat. Message me on any of those things. You can ask me questions about episodes, Star Wars, anything in particular that you really want to talk about. It doesn't have to be anything specific. It can be just random chit chat. Haha, the name of the show, funny. But yeah, I just want everyone to be safe and be careful and know that this is quite a shit situation for a lot of us, but if we are all careful over the coming months, we should all be able to get out of it. I say all, obviously a lot of us should be able to get out of it. The vulnerable people here are the ones that are the most vulnerable, really. They're the ones that are going to suffer the most from it. Most healthy, in air quotes, people aren't going to be suffering in the same way. So it's just something to keep in mind. I'm not going to get really preachy about it because I don't know enough about the subject to really become preachy about it. Just stay home, stay safe, and, give people a call. Give friends and family members calls and video calls and stuff. We need to try and keep interconnected, and we're very blessed that even though what's happened is awful, at least we all have the internet and stuff, so we can still communicate in things, and you guys can listen to my lovely voice, because what is better than being in isolation and being able to hear me talk all the time? Literally anything is probably what Megan would say. But anyway, guys, as I say, really appreciate all of you listening. I really hope you all stay safe, and I'll talk to you next week.